Good morning. Welcome back to the Energy and Environment track of the 2022 Iowa Ideas Conference. We had some amazing sessions yesterday, and the speed networking this morning was interesting. I'm Erin Jordan. I'm with the Gazette. I'm a reporter, and I'm moderator for this panel discussion on Bitcoin mines and data centers, how large energy users affect Iowa's power grid. I will let our panelists introduce themselves in just a moment, but just a few details first. All of our Iowa Ideas sessions have closed captioning access and all are recorded. Please feel free to send in questions and we'll integrate as many of those as we can into our conversation today. But before we get started, we have a quick message from our track sponsor, Alliant Energy. All right, great. Well, we may have one more panelist joining us here, but I'd like to ask our two panelists we have to briefly introduce themselves and their connection to the topic today. JP, do you want to start?
Sure. Hello, my name is JP Barrick, and I am the founder and CEO of miningstore.com. We operate mining facilities in Iowa, Bitcoin mining facilities in Iowa. I'm super eager to talk today about the impact of Bitcoin mining on the grid, demand response, and how energy works on the grid.
Thanks. And Jim?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Martin Schramm. I'm a professor emeritus at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa. My training is in ethics, and most of my work has been in ethics and public policy, especially around energy and climate policy. One of my concerns as an ethicist is energy burdens, the extent to which households, the amount of disposable income households spend on energy. And obviously for the poorest households, that percentage is high.
That's great. And then hopefully we'll have Carrie Johansson from the Iowa Environmental Council joining us here. But, just to kind of lay the groundwork, I wanted to ask JP and Jim, how do you define a large energy user? How much power does that mean? And what types of purposes would you say kind of fit into that category?
I think hi, there's Carrie.
Hey, Carrie, welcome. I was just saying that Carrie's with the Iowa Environmental Council. Would you want to provide any further introduction about your role with that group?
Sure, sorry about that. Yes, I'm the Energy Program Director with the Iowa Environmental Council. So I oversee our energy program work, and IEC does a variety of work on the intersection of energy and climate. We do regulatory work at the Iowa Utilities Board. We work at the legislature. We do local and some federal work as well on this topic. So thank you so much for having me.
That's great. Yeah, we're glad to have you. So I was just kind of asking the panelists how you would define a large energy user. Is there a certain power amount per day, per year, or is it like the purpose, and just if each of you want to address that, that would be great.
Well, I'll just, offer some initial remarks. As I said, I just recently retired from Luther College, and Luther College is a large general service customer of Alliant Energy. Pretty much almost all of the electric utilities in Iowa have separate tariffs for residential, commercial, and industrial customers. So large power users tend to fall under the industrial category. And what is somewhat unique there is that those users are using a lot of energy, electrical energy in this case, that is measured in kilowatt hours, but also in terms of capacity, demand. And so 75% of your bill is pegged to your peak demand usage over the course of a year, which is different for residential and commercial customers. That's all sort of baked into the retail price per kilowatt hour. So large users are those that use a lot of energy and typically have a constantly fairly high demand on the grid, and as a result can use that electricity more efficiently. As a result, they typically have lower rates. Not typically, they have lower rates from the utilities. So I'll turn it over to Carrie and JP to fill in around the edges there.
Yeah, I did what Jim said about the constantly using energy. A big part of energy production and consumption is how often are you buying, and how often does the utility know that you're going to be buying the energy. And so in some of these contracts with large industrial users, they're actually having to commit to using the energy from the energy company. And if they don't use the energy, they still pay for it. That contract is called a take or pay contract. And so we see these large energy users are committing to using X amount of energy due to their production process. Usually they're taking energy as a raw material, and they're making some other material, either fertilizer, ethanol, aluminum, Bitcoin, and they're taking that raw energy and producing it into a commodity that we perceive has more value.
Yeah, I think they did a great job summarizing it. I don't really have anything to add.
Okay, that's great. Well, we'll have plenty more opportunities to kind of talk about who fits into this group. I want to ask JP a question, but I think Dan might have to unmute you. JP, your company miningstore.com opened Iowa's first cryptocurrency mining site a couple of years ago near Grundy Center in Eastern Iowa. Wondered if, I don't know if this is possible, but to give us a brief explanation about how crypto mining works and how it uses energy.
Sure. So I don't know if we opened up the first, but we did open up a facility in Grundy County. And how does Bitcoin mining work? We take the energy we look for energy that is stranded or low cost. We take that energy and we put it through a computer server. These computer servers are always becoming more efficient in how they use the energy and how many terahashes or hash rate is produced. And so the hash rate is the computational speed that all Bitcoin miners use to compare themselves to other Bitcoin miners, similar to when you have a computer and how fast it is or how much RAM you have. So we use that metric to determine how much hash rate we generate based on these machines. And then each hash rate that we generate gives us a little bit of Bitcoin every day. And so we provide security to the Bitcoin network, and we mine new Bitcoins through the extraction process called Bitcoin mining. So the only way Bitcoin can be generated is by utilizing electricity, and that's what protects Bitcoin. It has a real cost to it. You cannot print more Bitcoins like we can print unlimited amounts of dollars. And so Bitcoin are created through this extraction process called Bitcoin mining. And that process becomes harder every 4 years, significantly because the amount of Bitcoins that are available, there's a set cap of 21 million Bitcoins. And every 4 years, the amount of Bitcoins that miners are able to get cut in half. So we have to become more efficient with our computers or find lower costs of energy to stay competitive.
You did a good job. That's summarizing that complicated aspect of that. How did electricity rates in Iowa and specifically in Grundy County play into your decision to locate there?
Well, I met an individual who brought me to Iowa. I was at a conference in Denver, and he mentioned that there was an opportunity due to the nature of how the Iowa grid set up and how there's a lot of local co-ops to participate with a local co-op and act as a demand response resource in the area. So Basin Electric has a program that allows load demand response resources to turn off 7 months out of the year and then maintain full uptime 5 months out of the year. So 7 months out of the year, we turn off our facilities in order to get a low electricity rate, and we're turning off during the peak. As Jim mentioned, most of the bill is about 75% of the bill is happening during that peak hours when everyone needs the power. But we turn off during those times, and we're giving back the energy to the grid. And then during the times that the energy isn't being used, or there's an overabundant production of renewables, we're back online using the energy from the grid. So we chose Iowa because of the cheap energy, the high renewable penetration. Iowa has the biggest wind capacity when it comes to penetration out of any state. It's like close to 40% wind in Iowa. So that was another reason why it contributed to our facility being beneficial to be there due to the nature of wind being intermittent and our load being constant but interruptible.
And I think, that's all these factors kind of vary depending on where you are in Iowa. Iowa obviously does have a lot of wind, but I think the REC that you guys are affiliated with has maybe a smaller share of wind than maybe like some of the other larger.
Yeah, well, the wind goes into the open market, and then the wholesale market is where the Corn Belt Basin, these companies can buy from. And I know there was something on the topic in the future, talk about letting large energy users buy from the wholesale market. And a lot of this energy in the wholesale market, it simply doesn't get used or consumed or purchased, and it's sold into this market without really in the negatives. And so you're right, our utility doesn't buy from the open market wind, but that's something that we're working on, figuring out how do we utilize more of the stranded wind energy, but it's more of a political and regulatory issue, less of a contractual issue at the moment.
Okay, so we'll come back to that. I wanted to talk about the impact of crypto mining on the power grid. Carrie, when we did the Gazette did a story earlier this year, kind of talking about the impact on the grid. You kind of did some estimates comparing the 6 megawatts of power the site uses to the nearby city of Grundy or of Grundy Center, just with their population and the amount of energy homes usually use. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was just looking at back at that article. I know that we had talked about, I think the information was that the demand was about 6 megawatts of power. And of course, that was going to assume that facility was operating on a constant basis, I believe. And so we looked at just how much energy that would take versus the average homeowner. And so I think that the back of the envelope calculations I did showed that facility basically represented the same amount of load as the residential customers in Grundy County. And when you're looking at that, it's a matter of, what does the infrastructure look like that it takes to supply that energy? And just I think what we talked about a lot was making sure that that cost is allocated fairly among customers, and that the cost of any increased capacity is really allocated to the customer that's causing the increased capacity costs, and as well as any upgraded infrastructure costs that are necessary then to have that level of a connection.
Yeah, I can comment on that. So when we did come to Grundy County, we spent in excess of $200,000 to upgrade infrastructure, specifically for our load, to ensure that we could utilize the substation. And we upgraded lines to provide us capacity so that no other ratepayer had to take on any costs or liability for our usage of energy and the infrastructure that was required to get us running. And that's how it works with most utilities.
And Jim, you kind of looked at the energy consumption there. I know you kind of compared it to Luther College, or how would you kind of put that in context for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, when you approached me originally about this topic, I was trying to wrap it around what I know, and what I know is Luther. And so, as a large general service customer, I was just sort of comparing a Bitcoin mining operation using 6 megawatts of power, maybe not 24/7, but when they're on, like JP was saying, probably are drawing about 6 megawatts. Well, Luther, a college of about 1,600 students, 600 staff and faculty, our peak is around 2.3 megawatts. So, you're talking about an enterprise that is 3 times larger, approximately, a little less than 3 times larger than a pretty large institution here in Northeast Iowa. And so I was just trying to put it into comparison in that respect.
And there are differences talk about how often you are powered down at the mining store and how that, I mean, how you use energy intermittently, or you've agreed to power down, and how often that occurs.
So we get an alert whenever the grid is getting to capacity and the amount of energy available is starting to dwindle, where then the investor owned or the utility would have to go and buy from the open market or have to turn on peak generation such as coal or natural gas to meet demand. We get those notifications, I would say, out of the 7 months out of the year that we have to respond to them. Those are going to be during the really cold months and the hot summer months. So that's when the peaks usually occur. And if there's a peak every month. And so what is a peak? A peak is when everyone's using energy at the same time. So in the winter, that's at 7 a.m. when everyone's heating their house. In the summer, that's in the afternoon. We get those messages and we turn all of our infrastructure down to relatively almost like 100 kilowatts. So we go from six megawatts to 100 kilowatts down, put everything into sleep mode. And we'll do that anywhere between 30 to 120 hours a month, and of those 7 months. And we're turning off so that the ratepayers do not have to absorb the cost of increased energy. So when energy is becoming scarce across the grid because everyone wants it, the price of energy begins to go up. And just like someone who's trading in the stock market, when someone sells energy back into the grid or gives stocks back, that price of that stock will go down. So same thing happens with energy. We give the energy back to the grid. And so the energy price comes down because the price was going up because there was more demand than there was supply. So we're providing that supply back to the grid, allowing the utilities to better manage their wholesale purchases of energy on the grid. And that affects rate consumers or consumers across the rate base, and ensures that their rates are not being affected by our energy usage, because we're using energy when it's at a low cost per megawatt hour and not when it's very expensive and it's going to affect ratepayers.
So Carrie and Jim, go ahead and respond to that if you'd like.
Aaron, I was just going to ask if I can ask JP a question directly. I assume that's okay, but I didn't want to, JP, some large users are in demand response programs where when they get that alert and they choose to voluntarily cut their consumption, in some markets, including here in Iowa, that company is paid for the energy it is not consuming. Do you have that relationship with the Grundy Co-op?
I wish we did, but we don't get paid. I've been pushing to enter into what's called the demand response program in SPP, but due to the regulatory nature of the grid and how we like to support, who's got our back, they're not letting us into those programs. So we simply turn off with no compensation. But if we do use energy when everyone else needs it, our bill is about 3 times higher. So that 4.5 cent energy rate is now 12 cents for the energy, which doesn't make our business economical. We can't operate. We're extracting that resource. So we do not get compensated for any of the time we're down. And we do not know how many hours a year we're down. So we have to turn off no matter if it's the peak or not the peak. Due to the system at Corn Belt and with Grundy, we do not know when the peak's going to be. So we turn off for every potential peak, which means we could be off for 5 or 6 days in a row in the afternoons. And none of those days we were compensated, but we're still employing staff and providing their benefits and hourly wages while they're working at the facility.
Hey, Carrie, do you think that this model that like the mining store is using this arrangement, does it mitigate some of those grid concerns, or do you feel like it's not large enough scale to kind of mitigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's certainly beneficial to have that as part of the agreement so that you are not at the peak times continuing to run maybe non-essential type services. However, yes, like I think for the overall grid as a whole, it's probably you have to pool these demand response type resources together to really make a difference. And Jim mentioned the programs that the utilities have Folks in other states have these same kinds of things where everyone's sort of at the same time as being asked to curtail, and that together makes a difference for the grid. Whereas one facility by itself probably won't, but probably a lot of folks are being asked at that same time to do those curtailments. I think one of the questions though is just thinking about the difference between being a supply resource, right, and being a demand resource. So yes, like curtailment is a good policy. We should probably use more of it because it's flexible. And so we're not trying to, ramp power plants up and down at those peak moments. But it is still a growth of demand overall on the grid as we're thinking about how much power do we need overall to power our economy and power the needs of people in Iowa and the United States. I think, my bigger question is is it necessary? And I think we've started to see some companies move to policies that, or move to, a proof of stake type model that doesn't use up what is a really important resource and an environmentally sensitive resource, and one that is really necessary for health and safety and our economy of that everyone in Iowa and the U.S. needs. So I think that's the bigger question I have about the growth of this industry and whether there's a better way to do it that's not so resource intensive.
JP, would you explain the difference between the two different models that you use? Yours is proof of work versus, and the other is proof of stake. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll talk a few things on what Carrie said. So first, with the demand response programs and acting as a load resource, what would happen if demand response programs weren't on the grid? So the operator of a grid has to maintain supply and generation. And so if you don't have a demand response program, you can't actually meet the necessary generation with the supply fast enough. We've talked to utilities in Iowa that have coal and natural gas plants, and they're scared about putting large loads behind the meter to meet the demand of consumers faster. They cannot turn on their coal and natural gas plants fast enough to meet the grid's demand. So what happens if demand response isn't there? What happens if we aren't consuming that energy? Well, in the event that there's no power available, all the citizens of Grundy County could have a brownout, and even wider affected, which means they would have rolling brownouts or rolling blackouts where they're losing their energy availability. So if you can't meet the generation with supply, that's what happens on the grid. And that is why demand response is so crucial, because they're the last line of defense for keeping the grid from going into brown or blackouts. And that's why they're paid handsomely in these programs to participate and to reduce usage. And that's available to consumers as well. You can turn off your HVAC unit and other type of units. Regarding energy usage and Bitcoin using energy, I would say that in 2020 alone, there were 8 million megawatt hours of wasted and curtailed wind energy in the United States. Bitcoin miners turn this wasted resource into domestic wages and tax revenue. And so we are basically taking a resource that no one else is using because this energy is being wasted, and we're providing on-site demand and consumption. When it comes to proof of work and proof of stake is a system to gather consensus. Proof of work is a system to gather consensus. Consensus is important for blockchains because blockchains, they scale and distribute trust like the internet scales and distributes information. We're able to talk because of the internet. Blockchains allow us to trust the blockchain or trust each other, that no one has money or sending money they don't have. Regarding proof of stake, that was implemented by Ethereum. That is a separate coin than Bitcoin. Bitcoin has a proof of work mechanism that it will never change because there's not a central party that operates and controls Bitcoin. And I also believe that the fundamental value of an economy and of a digital asset comes from the energy that was used to acquire that digital asset. It's very important, as we're seeing around the world, to have energy independence. And Bitcoin, it requires that amount of energy to be a sovereign currency, one that isn't protected by guns, but instead by energy. And I think that's very important to realize, is that if we want to create money and security for people across the world that is environmental, sustainable, and provides governance for people everywhere, and allows them to use money that isn't governed by a state or one or couple actors like banks, that's really important, that you have your money protected by something. And in the United States, we protect our money by guns and fear. With Bitcoin, we protect our money by energy. And so that's the transition. We've gone to securing assets, houses, properties, and digital real estate, Bitcoin, with energy instead of with guns. And I think that's a huge revolution for America and for people around the world.
Jim or Carrie?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of issues here, right? One is currency in general, and whether cyber currencies are a good thing or not with regard to a nation's currency that is issued by a Federal Reserve Bank. And I've never heard, I mean, the way JP put it here about, you know, securing that currency through guns versus through energy. I need to think about that a little bit more. Personally, I am not persuaded that cyber currencies are in the best interests of the citizens of nation states, but I can understand why there's a demand for it. And I think we all know how cyber currencies are being used for illicit purposes to transfer assets around the world that have been acquired through illicit means. So, but at the same time, I will acknowledge there's a lot of use of cyber currency that isn't for illicit purposes, and you can use regular American currency to, you know, to buy drugs and other things. I think the issue here, for me, is, as I understand it, the Grundy County Co-op's primary source of electrical energy is a coal-fired power plant through Corn Belt Cooperative. And while it is the case that the state of Iowa does produce about 60-some% of its electricity from renewable sources, primarily wind, we're still in a larger MISO grid, or not MISO, but US eGrid region, the Midwest Regional Operating System West, that is far more carbon intensive than other parts of the grid. For example, ERCOT down in Texas, where you know, wind penetration is even higher. And so, you know, the reality is that Bitcoin mining in Iowa is helping to provide revenue to a coal-fired power plant that is belching significant amount of carbon into the atmosphere. And globally and nationally, that it's not an insignificant amount. I know you, Aaron, you probably want to talk more about that later, but I just want to interject that at this point. So I'll stop there. There was another point I had, but I can't remember what it is.
I just have an audience question here for you, JP. What do you do with the heat generated by your facility? Is part of the 6 megawatts cooling, or do you use a recapture system?
So 2 questions there. All of our energy, or not all of it, but 95% of the energy we use goes towards our manufacturing process of generating new cryptocurrency. We do not use HVAC coolers. We do not use other type of cooling systems to cool the air. Similarly, if you're a data center, you're going to cool that air first, and then you're going to run it through the server. So they're using usually about 50% to 40% of that energy to cool it, while we're using closer to 5% of our energy to cool the air. Because we don't cool the air, we simply move the air from one spot to the other and move it through the server. And then that's when the air generates some heat. And we're looking into multiple ways to utilize our heat as a byproduct. We've not settled on one thing, but we've looked at anywhere from corn drying to anywhere from microgreens to utilize the heat in the winter and provide another source of revenue and also more employment for people in the Iowa community in the farming space, and anything that requires a large amount of heat. It's something that we haven't been able to find a manufacturing process that would benefit from the amount of heat we create. When we looked at corn drying, we noticed that actually there wasn't much heat being produced and needed for that process. There is a lot, but it's not as much as we produce. And so we were trying to find something that would match our heat output, but we have not yet found an item yet that would utilize our heat.
So I want to look at large energy users more broadly. And we've talked about, obviously, crypto is an interesting topic and one that's relevant in Iowa, but there's other large energy producers in Iowa, such as food producers, ethanol companies, and data centers. What's the role of these large energy consumers to the utility business model? Carrie, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So I think a couple of things. One is we talked a little bit earlier about having sort of a consistent underlying load for the utility to serve, and a customer that they know is going to be consistently purchasing power. That being one of the reasons that they do get a lower rate from the utility. It is also at least from the standpoint of our investor-owned utilities, which are regulated monopoly for-profit companies, that is one of the ways that they make money is by growing their customer base. And so attracting new customers, especially large customers with a consistent load that they know is going to, bring them in the income that they want, is important for the utility business model for them to grow load and make more money. So, we definitely, as we're thinking about what are the other benefits to Iowa from these large customers, what are the associated jobs? Are they carrying their fair share of the rate load compared to other customers, et cetera? Those are all considerations when you think about like the whole picture of what these large energy users contribute to Iowa.
Jim or JP?
I would just say that my knowledge of electric utilities in the state of Iowa is focused primarily on the performance of the investor-owned utilities, Mid-American and Alliant. And for each of them, the portion of sales or annual revenue generated by the company from large energy users is significant. I wouldn't have those percentages right off the top of my head, but somewhere around 30 to 35% would be my guess. So, they're a very important customer class. Alliant's sales to large industrial customers has actually been declining and has been declining for quite a while, for more than a decade. And that's, I suspect, because their cost per kilowatt hour, their average all-in cost, is significantly higher than, for example, Mid-Americans. And as a consequence, what you see is the decision by the tech companies to build big data farms within Mid-American service territory. And so it's interesting to compare Mid-American's sales to large users versus Alliant sales. Alliance looks like that, and Mid-American's looks like this. The graph is going up in a significant way, and of course those sales generate significant revenue, and that revenue helps provide the return on investment to shareholders, and perhaps is one reason why Mid-American has not been before the board, the utility board, for a rate increase proposal for quite some time. So, I mean, I'm just trying to testify to the benefits of having large energy users. Now, part of the reasons why those tech firms opened up there was rock bottom prices from Mid-American, although I think JP has managed to secure even lower prices from his goal. Okay.
Yeah, Facebook and them, they got the state to allow them to get lower energy rates. So it is subsidized energy. We do not receive any subsidies from the government.
Okay. Anyway, what was my point there?
Oh, the reason data centers have located there because
is because of at least Mid-American's significantly lower rate compared to Alliant, but also because Mid-American does have a bucket load of wind. And so they can certify that, I forget what their current percentage is, but these tech firms like to tell their customers, look how green we are, we're sourcing wind energy. But I think, truth be told, what they care about is the cost of that energy. That's the driving force when you consume so much of it. So I'll just stop there.
And that was a question from an audience member. How important is it to these businesses to use renewable energy sources to their decisions to locating in Iowa? It sounds like, Jim, you're maybe a little cynical that it's in part so they can say that they use those renewables, but also, but maybe more about the cost.
Yeah, I think so. That's kind of where I am.
I think one nice thing to note is that, we do have a ton of renewable energy in Iowa, and we have a really low cost of energy. And so those two things actually, follow each other. They're not in spite of each other, right? And so it's kind of a nice win-win, I think, for the tech companies that, do have sustainability goals, as well as, lots of other corporations have these kinds of sustainability goals, and our renewable energy capacity in Iowa does help that, pairs super nicely with our low rates, right?
Yeah, but Carrie, I'll say this, I'm pretty sure you're a customer of Mid-American Energy in Des Moines. I'm a customer of Alliant Energy, and if you're a customer of Alliant Energy, you're paying, Alliance rates are 60% higher for residential households compared to Mid-American, and similar percentage for commercial, and a similar percentage difference, although less for industrial. So yes, we have high concentrations of renewables in Iowa, but I wouldn't say it's helping all of us the same way. And so, that's something that we also just need to have as a broader context, I think, in this discussion. I think I would feel differently about data mining in Iowa if I had greater confidence that data mining was being powered 24/7 by wind and solar, or even nuclear. Unfortunately, Duane Arnold is now closed. So I just can't get past the fact that, I don't know about, JP's, consumption there in Grundy County, but nationally, we're talking about, crypto mining being somewhere between 1% and 2% of total electricity consumption, which is similar to all electricity consumption by all home computers or all residential lighting in the United States. And that's not me just pulling numbers out of my head. That's from a White House Science and Technology Office recent report in September. So it's a significant amount. Since China banned crypto mining in September of 2021, the industry has really ramped up here in the United States, and the estimates, I think, are about 38% of all global crypto mining is taking place here in the US. And it's on an exponential growth curve in terms of electricity consumption. So if that consumption is going to continue to prop up coal-fired power plants that, in my view, we need to be shutting down to reduce emissions, then that's one reason why I'm skeptical about the wisdom of growing the Bitcoin sector.
Yeah, and I'll comment a few things on there, Jim. The first one I'll mention is that the White House report that did come out, it all has come out from this one University of Cambridge electricity consumption data index, which says that the Bitcoin mining bound is anywhere between theoretical low bound 5 gigawatts of energy usage, estimated 12 gigawatts of energy usage, and the upper bound 20 gigawatts. So their calculations are all over the place. They've been proven wrong multiple times. There's a great paper by Nick out there. If you type in Bitcoin mining energy usage and White House report and how many things they misrepresented based on this data set that has been out there since 2017, but it's consistently pushing the agenda that Bitcoin's energy usage is going to consume more energy than the whole world has used. That's there's plenty of articles saying that that was going to happen by 2020. The second thing I'll mention is that we would love to use wind energy, 100%. I was before the IRA Act, the Stop Inflation Act, we were looking at purchasing a wind farm in Texas. That act, this wind farm was stranded, curtailed up to 60% of the time. No one wanted it. It was written off. And we were going to put our load there and use wind energy 50% of the time behind the meter, 25% of the time from where the grid has wind energy. And the rest would have been other types of renewable and coal and natural gas. The IRA Act comes out. Well, it prevents us purchasing that wind farm because now it's worth way more to simply repower this asset that isn't providing energy to anyone, but can make sure that the large energy producers and the people on Wall Street receive their returns through the tax credits, the renewable energy tax credits that got extended and increased. And so now that asset that was no longer providing really limited value to the community is now going to continue to run, be upgraded, and continue to provide limited value to the community, but only value to the the investors and shareholders. And so we would love to be able to buy from the open market in Iowa, but it is a deregulated, it's not a deregulated state. It doesn't have open retail access. And so you need to go through one of the 50 LSEs or load serving entities, most of them owned by large institutions and most of them large co-ops like Alliant and Mid-American. Even the small co-ops are not load serving entities. So your local community has to buy power from Corn Belt, who then has to buy power from Basin, who is an LSE. This makes it tremendously hard for the cost savings of this renewable energy penetration that we're all pushing for here today. It makes it hard to pass those savings to consumers. It makes it impossible. And why is that there? It's because that it's easier for us to set up the regulatory framework to ensure that the low cost energy does not get to the consumer and does not lower the bill and does not ensure that poorer people have a less percentage of their overall capital spent on energy. We're more focused on ensuring that the institutions can earn their 8-10% a year return and pay out to shareholders. And there's been legislation passed over the years that allows them to pay out more and more to shareholders and not have to upgrade their system or to charge higher fees. And so rates are going to continue to go up. And I hope the rates actually come down, but I'm scared that they won't. I'm scared that after this energy crisis, the rates will stay elevated, even as we have more wind and more solar penetration across Iowa. So I'm pushing for open retail access across the state and across anywhere in the United States, because I believe it's a more fairer system for energy users of all sizes.
So along those lines, last month, the group called the Iowa Economic Alliance called a news conference to say that this coalition of unnamed large energy users wants the ability to buy electricity on the open market rather than being locked into like a regional provider. Just kind of nuts and bolts of that. I don't know, Carrie, or someone else wants to explain how that would work, how you would buy energy on the open market versus going through like your provider like Alliant or Mid-American.
So we have yet to see the details of the proposal, I think much like most folks after the proposal came out. And so, there are, I believe, 4 other states that have a construct like this that would basically provide sort of an alternative tariff for folks to take service under if they're above a certain size. And then the rates that they're charged are reflective of wholesale market rates. I don't know if that is what the proposal is like, or, if it continues to go through the utilities, or if it would look different. It's something that we're still trying to gather information on and figure out, ultimately at the end of the day, what would this mean for everyone else in Iowa who is not able to buy energy on the open market. I think, like I mentioned before, one of the really important equity pieces is just like, how are infrastructure costs accounted for so that people continue to pay their fair share for infrastructure. At the same time, we do have, regulated monopoly utilities, and those utilities should have systems that are appropriate for serving the number of customers that they have. So, if there's an adjustment to how much capacity those utilities need to have at the ready, with a program that allows some customers to buy on the open market, is that like, what does that look like? And so I think that we just continue to have a lot of questions about what is the specific thinking, and then what are the intended and unintended consequences of this sort of pretty big shift for utility regulation and rates in Iowa.
Yeah, I like Carrie, I haven't seen the details of this either. I would be pretty strongly opposed to it if it only pertains to the large industrial user class. If they deserve the right to have open access to markets, then so too should everybody else. I think you want to be careful what you wish for. The folks in Texas that didn't read the fine print on their residential electricity contracts and wound up paying market rate during the polar vortex are still paying big time. So there are values to regulation. And in this case, I would be opposed to allowing only one ratepayer class to benefit in this way. The other thing I'll say is, and Carrie is probably better equipped to comment on this, my understanding is that every, at least investor-owned utility in the state of Iowa is required to pass along to their customers the cost of energy at the wholesale cost. Now, of course, they have distribution, they have, corporate activity and stuff that they have to pay for. So to my knowledge right now, the cost of the energy that is delivered to Luther College, for example, is based on the cost that Alliant has to generate it or to buy it in the market. Now, of course, they also have distribution systems they have to pay for, they have employees they have to pay for, et cetera. And so, if these large users only want the market energy and don't want to have to pay for the infrastructure to deliver it to them, well, then, those costs still have to be borne by somebody. And if they're going to be borne only by the other ratepayer classes, well, that's just, I'm an ethicist. That's patently unfair. I mean, I will fight that as hard as I can. Now, if we could set it up so that, Midwest, Mid-American or Alliance distribution grid, they own it, but they provide access to it by competitors that say, well, I'll sell your household electricity for 12 cents a kilowatt hour, and then I can choose from different vendors. That would be great, but we're not nowhere near that situation right now.
And I'll add to what Jim said about the infrastructure and how that's done in other open retail markets. So depending on your voltage you connect into the grid, depends on your rate class. And so when you plug into your house, that's usually 120 volts or 240 volts. And that's going to be the highest rate because there's a lot of infrastructure to take that energy from the wholesale market, which operates close to 135 kVA or a much higher voltage, where you see the large electric transmission lines compared to at your house. Those substations, the green boxes you see outside your house, the transformers, those all are infrastructure costs that need to be distributed across the rate base. So in previous retail proposals, as mentioned, I'm not as familiar with this one, but you have to interconnect at a certain voltage. So you'll be required to build out all of your own infrastructure to interconnect into the grid. And then regarding the cost of the energy, we do pay transmission and demand charges for the energy as it comes across those wires. And that usually is a tolling fee that is charged even if you're buying from the wholesale market, assuming you're not at one of these nodes where the energy is traded. And those nodes are accessible. They're all viewable online. You can actually track the price of the energy on those nodes. And I would definitely suggest looking at either MISO or SPP nodes and take a look at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. Most of the time, that price for the energy that you're paying $120 a megawatt hour for, or 12 cents a kilowatt hour for, it could be selling for a cent or even negative. So they're paying to take it, but they're charging you to use that same energy on your computer, 12 times more. And I personally don't think that's fair. So I think deregulation for all, no matter if you're a large energy user or a small energy user, is the best way forward.
One question I have, the coalition's members who the group described as, quote, large retail, manufacturing, agricultural, and technology are not making themselves known. Does the panel have a sense of why?
Well, I mean, my guess is they would not appreciate being criticized for trying to scoop up benefits that other ratepayer classes can't get. And it does feel like a power play to me. So that'd be my reaction.
I was shocked when I saw it. I was like, people are actually trying to do this, because usually should be open, in my opinion, open for everyone or closed for all the markets. And I don't know who's in it, but I'm guessing it's probably your bigger tech data centers that are pushing for this because of how intensive and how fast compute is growing. Amazon revenue is growing 30% year over year. That's not a small company in their AWS business. That's billions and billions of dollars. And so in order for them to keep up, they have to scale the data centers and continue to build those. Advancements in AI and machine learning are going to only put more demand on the need for data centers across the world as we move to this new era of computing.
I will note that during the last rate case, during Alliance's last rate case, the utility board asked every intervener in the docket to identify all parties that are members of the intervener. So for example, there was a Decorah area group. So we had to identify, well, that's Luther College, and that's the city of Decorah, and that's the community college, etc. Well, there's there are a couple of large groups, IBEC, Iowa Business Energy Coalition, maybe, and then the Large Energy Users Group, LEG. And the board said, we want you to tell us who are the members of each of your groups. And so now, and I really appreciate this. So now, in pretty much every filing, whenever LEG or IBEC, file something, there's a footnote, and it says LEG consists of, and then all of the entities are named. I don't understand why. If I were the board, and this thing came before us, I would insist that the members of this organization, this alliance, or whatever it's called, be outed. I mean, it's just not acceptable to hide behind some generic name. That's garbage.
Now, they had said at the news conference that their next steps would be, I think, working through the Iowa Economic Development Authority. And I feel like that they might be trying to get legislation, or I don't know, Carrie, if you have a sense, like on the policy front, what the potential next steps would be for a group like this if they wanted to have a proposal brought forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think my understanding, and I really only know from what I read, is that it was my understanding that the goal would be some kind of legislation. And I do think that to do what what they want to accomplish, I do think it would require legislation. I don't think it is something that could be done through a regulatory proposal, just given all of the other structures that are in place around rate making and rate allocation. And I think it would be really hard. So I think that if you wanted to accomplish this, it would have to be a legislative proposal. I'm not a lawyer, but that's my assessment of the policy process for it.
And I'll comment on that. The Iowa, every state has a utility board. So Iowa Utility Board is one of the decision makers here. Then you have SPP and MISO, which are the two major regional RTO providers, or kind of like the markets where this energy is traded. They also have their own rules, and those operators cover multiple states. And there's two of them in Iowa, two of the MISO and SPP. So they also have a decision potentially to make here, because they are part of the reason why you have to buy the power through the LSC, the load serving entity in SPP, and in MISO, they're called something different because of the nature of the market. So there's a lot of participants here at the local, federal, and regional level.
No, I did ask them specifically whether crypto mining sites would be part of their coalition, and they said they would leave the door open there. I don't know, JP, if you've been invited or if it's something that you're interested in.
I have not been invited. We are a very small player in a very big industry. I do this because honestly, I love it, and because I have this belief that energy can create value and should be cheaper for everyone. But we're a very small player in a big, big space.
Okay. I guess just last question, kind of open-ended, throw this out there since this is Iowa Ideas. Are there any other ideas that we haven't talked about for balancing the needs and desires of large energy users with those of residential customers or smaller businesses?
I think opening up the markets for everyone, really opening up the wholesale markets to get this cheap wind energy to consumers and to industrial users could be huge for the industry, but it's going to take a while to get there. As we're seeing, when one group wants it, but they don't want everyone else to have it, it doesn't sound too good, it doesn't feel good, but maybe it's something we all should look at and try to push for everyone.
I think one of the things that, we've been talking about for a little while, is the idea that, our utilities in Iowa have seen opportunities for, growing their capital base through building more and more stuff and selling that electricity into wholesale markets, and have sort of set things up, Mid-American in particular, to help, pay things down as they go. But as we're thinking about, we're thinking about load growth, we're thinking about what's really cost effective at this point in time. We don't have, even though we have utilities that are what's called vertically integrated, where they own the generation, they own the transmission, and then they sell the power on a retail basis. We don't have any requirements for those utilities to make a plan that applies directly to their Iowa customers, which pretty much every other state that has vertically integrated utilities requires something called integrated resource planning. And so that takes a comprehensive look at the system and says, like, what do you actually need to serve Iowa in the most cost-effective way to make sure that we have fair rates that are fairly distributed? And so, that's something I think we're at a point maybe a little bit past due for implementation of some sort of integrated resource planning for our utilities.
Sorry.
Jim, any final thoughts?
Sorry about that. I should have put my phone on mute. I'd just say another thing, and I think JP mentioned this earlier, a significant cost for all of us as ratepayers is transmission. And there's, on that score, a significant difference between the cost of transmission for Mid-American customers versus Alliant customers. And I think the same is true for folks who are customers of co-ops and munis. That's the Iowa Utilities Board has grappled with that issue. They feel a little bit kind of cut off from how all of this happens. The board determines siting, but not cost. And that's up to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And that's another really critical piece here, because as we shift away from fossil fuels and electrify everything, well, that electricity's got to come from somewhere, and it's going to come on high voltage lines to some extent. I personally think we need to be more decentralized and enjoy the benefits of distributed energy resources, and therefore maybe not have to have quite as many huge high voltage lines crisscrossing parts of the country. But that's another piece to get a handle on cost that is relevant to this discussion.
And I'll just
go ahead, JP.
I'll just end by saying that the core problem is that we, as a legislation in the United States, we incentivize production of energy, but we do not incentivize the transmission or consumption of energy. So we're really incentivizing adding to the load base, but not to ensure that consumers have lower energy costs across Iowa. And I think that needs to change in order for us to have more economic development and lower the cost of energy across Iowa for everyone. And that's the big hurdle. It's just the wrong incentives.
Well, we've run out of time, but this has been a great discussion. I've been making some notes here, and I'm looking forward to digging into some of these other topics as a reporter. Thank you so much to our panelists for today. We've got JP Barrick, CEO of the Mining Store, Carrie Johansson, Energy Program Director for the Iowa Environmental Council, and Jim Martin Schramm, Professor Emeritus from Luther and a sustainability consultant. And thank you to our online audience. We've got several good questions that have come in here through this hour. The next energy and environment session, which starts at 11:15, is on the effects of extreme weather on agriculture, infrastructure, and people. I hope you can all come back for that. So thanks again to everyone.